Greetings, Tubaneros. Weimar, as you might likely know, refers to the constitutional republic adopted by Germany at Weimar in 1919, whereby the German Republic was founded on the terms of the Treaty of Versailles after World War I. As you might also know, this was often called a pseudo-republic, chiefly because it was imposed against the will of its people with disastrous results for the whole world down the road. I contend that in the past dozen years, the U.S. has degenerated into a Weimar democracy of its own, with decreasing legitimacy, and that the USA is rapidly approaching one of those existential crossroads it is essential not to fuck up if it's serious about its continued existence. So, I'm going to launch into one of these more philosophical videos on the contradictions, if any, between the democratic ideal and the state. As we know, the idea of direct rule by the people becomes physically problematical the more the people multiply. Since not everyone can sit in a national Congress, there must be representatives, and if these representatives are freely chosen by the governed in an open electoral process, so the theory goes, the state is therefore considered democratic. The problem, of course, is that these publicly elected middlemen too often confuse the public interest with their own careers, and the state treasury with their own checkbook. Anti-statists will tell you that the state is inherently anti-democratic anyway, as it is an imposition by force upon the governed. And most certainly it can be that. But it is more. It fulfills the objective functions of a complex society in a way that mere local initiatives cannot. A local government can provide for its own road networks, its own schools very often, its own public entitlements. In fact, local government is rarely anything more than a friends and family network, notoriously short of working capital and notorious also for keeping its goods and services confined to chosen insiders. Anti-statists of a libertarian bent will say that's where private capital needs to enter to provide those services and preempt the state function, avoiding the authoritarianism and cronyism that comes with it. Yet, this really only begs the question because the privately capitalized provider requires state enforcement of its property claims and its bill collection. What's more, there is little accountability of such a private entity, either by local public consumer or higher authorities, because its property right is considered sacrosanct and not amenable to public or consumer compulsion except in criminal violations. So the private middleman does not take up the democratic slack either between citizen and state. In fact, as his power grows, he parasitically subjects both citizens and the state to his unaccountable private authority, subverting the public office of the former to restrict the rights of the latter. Think of the Supreme Court's Citizens United case again. What about elections? Don't they make a state democratic, like we just defined? Well, let's look at another European example, Poland. In the 20th century, Poland was governed by the Tsar's autocracy, a landowner-dominated parliament, or Sejm, then a military regime under Marshal Pilsudski, and after his death, a clique of Banana Republic colonels, occupied by the Greater German Reich, then liberated by the People's Committee of Lublin with its Soviet army at its back, to form into the People's Republic, then by a freely elected multi-party Sejm once again. In all these various mutations and transformations, the real Polish people were, with one brief exception, passive spectators or victims in a changing circus of bureaucrats, officers, aristocrats, and occupiers. It didn't matter whether the state was formally right or left, military or elected, socialist or free market. All these forms were imposed from above, with the masses serving only to endorse an imposition decided elsewhere. Speaking of Banana Republic, Central American death squads stood behind the free elections of Central America, and of course that didn't stop voters who voted wrong from ending up in body dumps along with other losers. So obviously mere elections can't be the essence of democracy either. What about the rule of law and its basis, the Constitution? Well, U.S. anti-statists are paradoxically often strict constitutionalists, as they falsely believe the U.S. Constitution maximizes freedom over state rule. The so-called strict constitutionalists will wave their little printed copies of it in your face. This is published by the American Civil Liberties Union, obviously can't be the right one. But anyway, they'll wave it in your face as they stand on their rights to gun ownership or religious fundamentalism, but they're silent over such things as the Electoral College, where the will of the people is directly subverted by a middleman body whose job is to make sure the unruly, unwashed mob, you, doesn't dirty up the temple of democracy by actually setting foot in its holy sanctum. Electors ought to do the job for you, like priests administering communion. That the medium becomes the message in such a system becomes clear when you see the current GOP Congress trying to jerry the electoral districts to give them control of Electoral College votes, no matter the popular results. In fact, George Shrub Jr. won in 2000 more by the Electoral College votes of Wyoming than the Supreme Court's tinkering with the Florida popular vote. Which, of course, returns us once again to the Supreme Court itself. Its present function is nowhere mandated by the Constitution. You may look in this in vain to see any direct third leg of government mentioned therein. But the anti-statist Constitution worshippers nicely ignore that. And why shouldn't they, since its extra constitutional powers serves them so well? So the rule of law, that is, courts and judges, is not necessary to democracy either, as an equal part of state. Well, the Occupy movements from below have shown us an alternative. It's nothing new. Wherever people have been oppressed by an unrepresentative regime, this tactic has been employed, and that is to create an alternative counter-government. Oh, it wouldn't have any legal state authority, but there's nothing wrong with citizens willfully bypassing the formal structure of state to settle disputes between themselves, to support alternative education and working structures, their own cooperative banking and medical institutions. This has been done in occupied Palestine, in the South African townships under apartheid, in Serbia and occupied Kosovo until the CIA-funded KLA took over. This could be attempted in the U.S. too, maintaining this as a viable alternative to the existing and corrupted political system and economic system as well. I don't advocate abandoning the political, legal, or economic system to the forces of tyranny, just recognizing that playing in the system by its own rigged rules can hardly be enough. The political center is being gutted and destroyed as much as the middle class. The political polarization is a complement to the economic brink beside which we're badly balancing on one foot. This is the Weimarization process. Obviously something new is needed. This was exactly what Hitler said in Germany, and in that much he was right, if not the right person to look to. Because if we just stand pat, we'll only be pulled toward that black hole, and finally just shoved in. Which brings me back to Poland. At only one point was Poland really democratic in its history, and that was during the Solidarity period of 1980 and 1981. For a brief time, Poland experienced real people power, with the bureaucrats at bay and no profiteering middlemen in the form of politicians or capitalists. It was a national Occupy Poland movement, which, like the other examples I gave, couldn't last in such an intangible form. But it was on the way to transforming the Polish state into something truly public and representative, until its violent repression. Local initiative ran day-to-day affairs, while public services, ownership, and social entitlements remained intact. There was a developing partnership nixed by apparatchik bureaucrats, the equivalent of Wall Street fat cats sending the police to break up its present-day American counterpart. So the U.S. more and more resembles the Weimar Republic or the People's Poland of General Jaruzelski, even with his bi-party and increasingly meaningless free elections. When you hear Hillary Clinton or some other pontificating high priest babbling about the American people, be sure they mean only the investing middleman. But in the Occupy movement, as well as Solidarity of a generation ago, one sees the gestation of what a true democracy could be. A true partnership between government and governed as equals, with no middleman, private or public, usurping the commons, subverting the state to his own class purposes. Oh, I knock upon the phone again. Hello? Who? Gary and Mendham? What are you doing on this line? You just wanted to say?
An insipid, silly, frivolous, trivial, brainless cult drone. Yeah, fuck you.
Well, okay, I get you. That the fucked up nature of things is just indicative of the fucked up nature of things. That we're only fooling ourselves if we think we can make it ever better than what it is. Well, maybe, though I'm not ready to concede defeat yet, but antinatalists have one thing right. Like the Italian communist Antonio Gramsci said, the crisis consists precisely in the fact that the old is dying and the new cannot be born.